All right, folks, we're going to do a little recap on episode 6, season 9 of Alone. Now, again, I'm not going to talk about everybody that was in the episode individually. I'm just going to talk about kind of the things that stood out to me. And the big thing that stood out to me overall was we have folks that are smoking meat. Terry has got a Beaver and he's built a smoker. Timogen he got 3 grouse in one day, which is freaking awesome. Good for him. We'll talk a little bit later about how I noticed Timogen was shooting, which was pretty interesting. I haven't seen this before on the season. But anyway, we're going to talk about smokers first and smoking meat. In this type of long-term wilderness living type situation, being able to preserve your food is very, very important. On my season 8, I did a kind of a bushcraft wilderness refrigerator type thing just by digging a hole down in the creek bottom for my berries. And then I also built a smoker for the deer meat that I had. So I'll probably end up doing a video on these things, how to preserve food in a long-term wilderness living situation. May even be able to get to it next week, but we'll have to see. So Terry mentions that it's warm weather and it's wet. And those two things will cause meat to spoil pretty quickly. So I do a lot of backcountry hunting where I don't have access to ice or refrigeration or anything like that. And when you kill a big animal like a deer or an elk, or in this case a beaver, it's important to get that thing cooled down quickly, get the meat cooled down quickly. And if you can do that, meat is actually pretty stable. For instance, I was probably 4 or 5 years ago, I killed a bull elk and had the meat just in game bags with no refrigeration for over a week. It was actually 8 days that I had this elk out. So the temperatures were getting up into the 70s during the day. It was really nice, beautiful, bright, sunny days. And at night, it was getting down kind of just below freezing. And so in a situation like that, what I did is I put this elk, I hung it in the creek bottoms because all of that cold air sinks down into the creek bottoms at night, and that's going to be your coldest areas. Made sure that it was in the shade, made sure that it was hung and well ventilated. It was in game bags, which these guys don't have, to keep the flies off of it, and was able to keep that elk meat perfectly good for 8 days. It probably could have gone longer, but I didn't need to. In order to keep meat like that for a long time, you need to be able to hang it so that it dries on the outside, and it'll create this kind of rind on it, and that will inhibit bacterial growth. Now, if it's raining or if it's really humid or damp or something like that, it keeps the outside of that meat moist, and that is the perfect environment for bacterial growth, and that's when you're going to have trouble with your meat spoiling quickly. And so in that case, like what Terry's dealing with, you've got to get that stuff off the bone, you've got to get it stripped out into thin strips, and you need to get it smoked. Now, when I did my deer on season 8, that's exactly what I did. I killed my deer, I packed it all back. They actually showed me building the smoker in 1 day, but it actually took me 3 days to build that smoker, and then it took me another 3 days to smoke out and cure out all of my deer meat. So I built the smoker, stripped out all the deer meat, hung it all in there, and then I built a small fire in my smoker, and then I kept that fire going with green alder. I started it with lodgepole and then kept it fed with green alder. The alder creates a nice light smoke. You don't have the resin and the soot that you have with pines, and so that's something that I did notice with Terry. There's just a very brief moment in there where I think that's what he was doing. He had some sort of, it didn't look like pine he was smoking with, it looked like some sort of little hardwood in there, and I think it was alder. Could be wrong on that. But anyway, I kept that alder fire going in my smoker for 3 days. I'm not sure how long it took Terry to smoke his meat out, but on the screen I think it said something like 20 hours or something like that, which is probably about right for that amount of meat. But once that meat is dried down to a low enough moisture content where you can pick it up and squeeze on it and it's very firm, Once it's to that state, it'll keep for a long, long time, months. He also talks about rendering out his fat, which I talked about in the last episode. That's something that's very important. You absolutely need to render out the fat if you're going to be keeping it for very long, because the moisture, if you don't render the fat out, there's moisture in it, and that moisture will cause it to go rancid. But if you render it out, you get rid of all of that moisture, and that stuff has a shelf life of, years. So it looks like Terry did a great job working on his smoker and getting his beaver meat cured out so that he can store that stuff for long term. Now, one thing that I did notice later in the episode, Terry, it looked like he was trying to cut all the scraps of meat off of the bones. And he said something along the lines of, I'm not sure how to get all the meat off, or something like that. And I don't know if this is just the edit or not, but if you take those bones, the skull, all the bones, stick them in a pot and just put them on a real low, slow simmer, just barely simmering, all that meat will fall off. And if you take it one step farther and take his axe and break those bones, all of that bone marrow will come out, and you can make bone broth, which is fantastic. It's full of nutrients. And my wife Liz has actually just today released a video on how she makes bone broth. She made 60 jars of bone broth or something this year with a couple of turkeys that we got. So if you're interested in how she does that, how she puts it up, cans it, all that stuff, I'll put a link up here somewhere, and then also in the video description, so check that out. But there's a ton of nutrients in those bones, in all of the connective tissue, in the bone marrow inside the bone. So I hope that he's going to take advantage of that. And I couldn't tell, I don't know if it's just the edit or not, or if he's actually going to be doing that. I hope he does, because he's, if you just try to cut the meat off the bone, you're really missing out on a lot of nutrients. All right, so we're going to move on to Timogen, and I just want to briefly talk about mice. Mice don't seem like they would be much of a trouble, maybe just a little bit of an inconvenience, but I tell you, those little guys can really cause a lot of trouble. They can get into your food. They crap all over the place. Last season, in season 8, they cut Matt's bowstring. They just get into things. They chew things up. They can destroy your gear. If they get into your sleeping bag, they can pull the stuffing out. And it seems like every year, and I saw it in season 8 in my shelter, it seems like always when you get that first real cold snap, and especially when you get your first snow, it seems like there's an invasion of mice. We see it here at my place, at our house in Idaho. I saw it at my shelter in British Columbia up on season 8. But it seems like you always get that big influx when you first get that cold snap. And so he's setting little Paiute deadfalls for them, which is a great way to catch them. They're really effective for mice. So of course you can eat the mice. We've seen people eating mice on previous seasons. There's not really a lot of nutritional value to them, but I guess if that's all you've got, they would be worth eating. But if they can trap, they actually would make really good trap bait for some of the predatory species like pine marten or weasels or fox coyotes, things like that. I'm not sure if they can do any of that, but if they can, that's probably what I would use the mice for. So making those little deadfalls and other types of rodent traps is probably something that I'll cover in a future video. But anyway, we'll get there when we get there. All right, so let's talk about beaver. This beaver, like Benji said in the last episode, beaver is a fantastic resource for these guys. Man, I tell you, if I were in their shoes and I had a beaver colony on my site, I would spend a lot of time watching those beavers, because beavers, they don't occur individually. Beavers are a family unit, and so if you have a territory on your site, you're probably going to have 4 to 5 beavers, and if you were able to get you know, 3 beavers, that's almost as much meat as I had, 3 good-sized beavers anyway, that's almost as much meat as I had off my deer, and probably a lot more fat. Now, we see Tom going after a beaver, and he, again, I don't know if this is the edit or not, but he keeps referring to the dam. He's walking around this thing. He's actually, it shows him walking near a beaver lodge. And so the lodge, that's that big mound of sticks that we see. That's the central hub of a beaver territory. And so there's a colony there. There's a beaver colony there. Now, we've seen Benji, Terry, and Tom all get shots at beaver just by kind of stalking the shoreline early in the morning, kind of waiting on those guys. But one surefire way to bring beaver to you is to find a section of their dam, and all you've got to do is take your boot and just kick out a little spot so that the water starts flowing through, and they will be there that night. A beaver, they will not tolerate flowing water going through one of their dams, and so they're gonna, if you knock a little hole in their dam, they will come that evening and patch it up, guaranteed. So there's a couple other ways that are really effective at bringing beaver to you, because they're very territorial and they're pretty curious about changes to their environment. And so one good method is to just take some willow sticks or something like that, peel them so that they're nice and bright, and just like make a pile of willow sticks on the shoreline somewhere that they can see it when they're cruising the banks like that. And if they see those things, oftentimes they'll turn and come in to investigate. And that's one common way that you would bring them into a trap set. You can also make what's called like an imitation caster mound. So a caster mound is how beavers mark their territory. And so what they'll do is they dive down and they scoop up like a big wad of mud and debris off the bottom, and they push that up onto the bank and they deposit it on the bank. And so it looks like this little mound of mud and leaves and sticks and stuff like that. And then they get up on top of it and they excrete castor, which is, there's 2 glands inside the beavers kind of down in this area right here. And castor is actually, interestingly enough, it's used in vanilla extract or imitation vanilla flavoring and perfume. It's got a really kind of an interesting musky smell to it. But anyway, you can make that type of mound, and if a beaver sees like an unfamiliar castor mound in their territory, they're gonna come investigate it. So that's just one other way that you can bring beaver to a place that you might want to hunt them. Now, the big problem with beaver, as Tom finds out, is that they're rarely not in the water, and they're rarely in places where you could shoot them where they couldn't easily get back into the water. And that's a problem because they don't leave a blood trail. They can be very difficult to find. And so I don't know if Tom hit that beaver or not. He kind of questions that a little bit later, but he doesn't find it. And that's to be expected when you're shooting at animals in water. It just makes them very, very difficult to find. So I hope he finds some success later on, because if he does get a beaver, that's going to be a huge, huge benefit for that guy. All right, so we're going to go back to Timogen because there's one interesting thing that 99.9% of people wouldn't have picked up on. But Timogen gets a couple of grouse with his bow, and on grouse number 2, it shows him drawing his bow. And if you watch that clip, you'll see that where he has his fingers on the bowstring is way below where the arrow is knocked. So the arrow is knocked way up here on the bowstring, and his fingers are down here. So Timogen's using an aiming method for his traditional bow called a crawl. Basically, he's moving his fingers down the string, which brings that arrow up, gets it closer to his eye, and makes it easier for him to aim at those shorter distances. I've got a bunch of videos that go into all that stuff, like super in depth. I'm not gonna explain all that stuff right now, but just know that he's using an aiming method that I've never seen on the show before. So that just tells me that he's put some time in trying to figure out and trying to learn how to shoot his bow, which is fantastic. Good for Timogen. And anybody that's going into next season, you've got a couple of months. Y'all need to be shooting your bows like every day. You need to figure this stuff out before you get out there. Don't just go out there and wing it. You need to know how, if you're gonna take a bow, learn how to shoot it. All right, so the last little thing I want to talk about here is Jessies Fireplace. She does something interesting there. It looks like she's making some really good progress on her shelter. And, you know, she talks a little bit about questioning, you know, whether she's spending too much time on her shelter and not enough time looking for food. And I don't know. We'll have to see how that plays out. But, I mean, that's been a concern, you know, from the first that I've seen how big she's making her shelter. So we'll see how that works out. But she does do something very interesting with her fireplace that is something that's very useful. So Jessie builds kind of a flue or an intake from the outside of her shelter to the bottom of her fire. Now what that does is it draws fresh air from the outside the shelter to the bottom of the fire. So you've got cold, fresh air coming in and feeding the fire, and then that exhaust just goes up and then outside of her shelter. And so what that's gonna help is to keep her shelter smoke free. If she didn't have that, her fire would, the air inside of her shelter would tend to circulate within her shelter, which just takes that air from the top, circulates it to the down to the bottom, feeds the fire again, and it causes smoke to kind of circulate within your shelter. And so with that fresh air coming in, feeding the bottom, you've got an in combustion, and then the hot air goes up and out. And it's a much better system for having a fire in an enclosed shelter. It just makes things much more smoke free. All right, guys, that's going to be it for this video. Keep an eye out. Next Thursday, we're going to have a new video, maybe food preservation, maybe something on snares or traps. We'll have to see, but it'll be something cool. And then also don't forget to check out Liz's video over on her channel about how to make bone broth. We'll see y'all on the next one.